pictures of them with sick kids and think, that can't be that bad, right? Wrong. Because you know what? They didn't do diddly squat while they were there. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry have been in Australia kicking up controversy once again. And the biggest problem is that they're declaring this is a privately funded trip over and over in the headlines. But that's not fully true. And that might not even be the worst part. The real reason why they started their publicized vacation visiting a children's hospital is controversial, to say the least. And with an itinerary organized around their paid speaking gigs and for-profit ventures, the charity visits are a clear afterthought. And with no tangible value being provided, you know what I want to know the most? How did these awareness visits actually come to be? The Sussexes' plan was to go to Australia for these for-profit ventures for some paid speaking gigs and paid appearances. Then Meghan Markle hatched the idea to try to get rid of some of her as-ever stock that's not selling. You know, exploit a fresh market that has not yet had the displeasure of tasting her loose spread. Ew. But then they decided to tack on some charity visits under the guise of raising awareness, which is as pointless as it sounds. And then they brought their own photographer and journalist to maximize the publicity potential. The whole thing is a mess, and the strategy of using these brief visits to organizations and charities to soften the perspective of the trip isn't just controversial, it's slimy. And it turns out Team Sussex and Sunshine Sachs had to go asking, offering up a visit to flesh out their schedule, trying to find activities for the Meg. Because they have to keep their image going somehow. They can't justify publicizing their vacation if it's only business and for-profit stuff. And they can't convince a journalist to come along without doing something resembling royal activities. And they can't get these types of pictures to keep up their philanthropic image if they don't visit public charities or volunteer. What stands out the most? It doesn't matter to Harry or to Meghan that they're not actually delivering any value or donating any money to these organizations. They don't mind taking advantage of less privileged or sick children if it serves their public image well. But the real nagging question behind it all? Why is the media acting like this matters in the slightest? Hi everybody, I'm Beebs Kelly. Welcome back to another video. Before we dive in, I would like to invite you to subscribe if you haven't yet already. And if you'd like to, click like and hype and leave me a comment down below. In response to over 40,000, nearly 50,000 now, signatures on a petition signed by Australian citizens over the expense of their visit, the Sussex team, Meghan, responded in the media by saying that this trip is privately funded, so they're not sure what the petition is trying to accomplish. Well, one of the things the petition hoped to accomplish, and they clearly did, was to proclaim and make it known that people don't want to deal with the Sussexes, they don't want to support the Sussexes, and they certainly don't want to be footing the bill for any layer of the security involved for their visit, in large part because the massive general consensus is that Harry and Meghan don't need as much security as they seem to think they do. And this petition was a legitimate way to have these voices heard, as well as get it in the news and make it known. Maybe even a sprinkling of embarrassment for Harry and Meghan. So they did indeed accomplish sending a message regardless of the outcome of the petition. That's kind of the point of a petition. However, the Meg, as per usual, overlooks a crucial detail here. Even if the government isn't providing any accommodation on paper, there is still very real taxpayer cost associated with the Sussexes' activities anywhere that they go, via the regular police control of traffic and things of that nature, to close certain areas down for the Sussexes to come and go as they wish, in large part because the Sussexes demand to have large convoys and make a bigger deal of themselves than they really need to. The authorities in Australia have confirmed that taxpayers are covering the costs of police and public safety operations for their visit. And this is a visit that includes commercial endeavors and personal business for two people who are not providing any value to the country. They're not donating. They're not there for stimulating the economy or anything of that nature. They're there for their own publicity and money making to help themselves. So why would and why should the taxpayers foot any part of the bill? Anytime this comes up, this subject of security, police costs, and privately funded things of that nature, all these sorts of conversations, people mention, including Harry, I might add, Prince Harry has mentioned this a handful of times, trying to use this as an example in one of his many tantrums over security, that Taylor Swift got taxpayer-funded police protection and logistical security support for her Eras tour, for example. And Harry and people who don't fully understand the difference here use that as justification or reason why the Sussexes should also get security or police involvement and not have to pay for it or pay any extra. But here's the biggest difference when it comes to the taxpayer funding debate. Taylor Swift and the Eras tour brought in millions of dollars to each and every city that they stopped in economic stimulus and spending on transportation, venues, hotels, restaurants, etc. And so the cost of police involvement to help keep the area secure and navigate Taylor Swift's whereabouts during this massive tour, record-breaking tour, was very small, a very small percentage of the amount of money that got pumped into the economy and into the cities. The US alone had an economic boost of $5 billion in total impact from her tour. Plus, she donated millions along the way to the communities and cities, food banks specifically, in every stop along the way. So there is zero comparison here. Meghan and Harry are not boosting the economy. They're not inspiring spending, for goodness sakes, at all, and they're not donating as far as we have seen. In fact, there is zero documented donations or monetary gifting happening on this Australia trip at all from Harry and Meghan. Plus, their cultural impact or command of media is near non-existent. So it's not like they're going to inspire people to volunteer or bring donations to any place that they're visiting. No one really cares, and clearly the locals aren't having it. So the question remains, what are the acceptable limitations or expectations of private individuals traveling about and having the ability to call on police to provide additional security or traffic control? Where is the line, and how are those decisions being made? Due to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's controversial and entitled reputations specifically, this issue is exacerbated as compared to someone else. In their situation, it's been placed at the forefront of the news on all their trips and activities they've done so far, in large part because Harry has made it a public debate with his myriad interviews, statements, and lawsuits. He makes it a topic of public conversation regularly, so naturally he and Meghan should expect a conversation happening in the public sphere, with the other side of the equation, the taxpayers, having their voices heard too. And the public is doing just that. They're having increasingly strong opinions on footing the bill of even a portion of Harry and Meghan's visits, and they're doing so in greater numbers. Now, before we move on to the real reason behind starting the trip with the children's hospital visits, I would like to hear from you on this issue of the police security involvement and the taxpayer cost. Leave it in the comments how you think these matters should really be handled. After arriving in Australia, Meghan and Harry's first stop was rather peculiar to me, and I'll tell you why I think it's weird first. Harry and Meghan, as I said, didn't donate. They didn't volunteer a significant amount of time to do any sort of actual work, like physically helping. They're not injecting money into the economy in any way, shape, or form. They're literally in Australia to make some money and get some publicity, which we're going to get back to in just a moment. But they front-loaded their itinerary with a very specific, carefully chosen event that was designed to specifically soften the media coverage of the trip. And I think that's pretty slimy, because the first event of their trip was to visit a children's hospital. It just isn't sitting right with me or a lot of people online. But from a PR perspective, they're trying to pull out one of the oldest tricks in the book. To start a trip that has a little bit of controversy around it, with photos plastered all over the media of you at a children's hospital with sick children, is a surefire way to dampen down any casual critics and soften the image of the trip overall, and reduce the spread of criticism of the trip, because people unfamiliar with the couple see pictures of them with sick kids and think, that can't be that bad, right? Wrong. Because you know what? They didn't do diddly squat while they were there. The visit was intended as a morale booster for the patients, the families, and the staff, the caretakers at the hospital. How in the world are Harold, the petulant sourpuss, and his wife, the Meg, the narcissist, going to boost anyone's morale but their own with this visit? What is happening? Who approved this? It makes me sad to see these pictures of people lining up thinking it's going to be cool, and then it's the Meg and Harold who are there for like 90 minutes total. And that includes the time where they met these people here and had the photo op of their dreams, as well as time walking around the ward, meeting individuals who couldn't get out of bed, as well as a therapy session, which was probably at least 30 minutes in this little garden space. So that means they spent probably about 20 minutes in this setting, probably about 30 minutes wandering around, getting pictures like these, and then about 30 minutes here, and then there was, transition time included. The whole thing was done in 90 minutes. How is that boosting anyone's morale or doing anything significant? I am sorry. The only people who benefited here were Harry and Meghan. Some of the people who attended the lobby area didn't even know who it was going to be. They were just told it was going to be a special visitor. So they were surprised to see who specifically it was. So this to me is kind of sad. If some of the children or some of the people there actually did get excited and have their spirits lifted, then I guess it's worth it. But when you look at it from the perspective, like more objectively and zoomed out, I feel like it was a bad choice for Harry and Meghan, because it just draws attention to the fact that this didn't do anything really. It didn't actually help anybody in a real way. And for a lot of people who do know the Harry and Meghan saga, then they weren't going to actually be that pleased to see them. Harry and Meghan are some of the most unpopular, most controversial, most polarizing people. So that means at least 50% of the people there who even knew who Harry and Meghan were don't care for them. There was also reports that some people in the crowd thought it was the other brother. They thought it was going to be Prince William and Catherine. So the whole thing feels quite unfortunate. But from a different perspective, this also shows us just how inflated Harry and Meghan's egos really are. Just how deep the narcissism runs. That they were erroneously, delusionally believing that their presence alone is a morale booster for anyone. And that's enough without any tangible monetary help of any kind. 30 to 60 seconds of Meghan creepily touching you or Harry being introduced by Meghan is any degree of charity work. I can't even. They can't be serious that they think that is morale boosting in and of itself. The ego is out of control. It's kind of surprising that after all this time, Harry and Meghan are still that out of touch, firstly. But also, when you see this with this full picture and facts, it can only be viewed one way. Harry and Meghan scheduled this as their first event to manipulate the media narrative and the public image of this trip because it shifted the tone from nearly 50,000 signatures in protest and dodgy money schemes to pictures that trigger compassion in the viewer subconsciously, unwittingly. No one wants to see kids unwell. Absolutely no one. We all wish them better. So it tugs on everyone's heartstrings to see these types of pictures. And that inherently reduces some degree of scrutiny, which, said plainly, means that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle used this hospital and these ill children and the staff and the families in this hospital to benefit their own image for this money-making trip. And I find that unacceptable behavior. It really brings into focus Meghan and Harry's character, that they're willing to do something like this, and that they're willing to do it even though PR people or savvy media people will recognize exactly what they're doing, and they're doing it anyway. They could have saved themselves this exact criticism and revealing themselves to have questionable character by ending their trip with a series of charitable visits and doing this hospital visit at the end of their trip. Had they done it that way, it wouldn't look like they were trying to manipulate the media and soften the image of their trip and themselves, but then they wouldn't have the benefit of more positive press and softer criticisms during their trip. So they weighed these consequences, blatantly, obviously using this visit and the people there to soften the perspectives on their trip while they're there was greater value to them and outweighed it than genuinely, truly just visiting that hospital to try to boost morale exclusively and not getting any benefit from it at all. No, they had to do it this way where they still got a benefit from it. It's infuriating. But what else have they been getting up to on their trip? A bunch of activities that, once again, are not donations, are not boosting the organizations or economy or anything of that nature. No, here's what else they're up to. They went to the Australian National Veterans Art Museum and joined a pottery class there, where they did pottery with children of veterans to support military families. Meghan went to a women's homeless shelter in Melbourne to highlight community-led support for vulnerable women. And Harry's itinerary includes a sailing event on Sydney Harbour with Invictus Australia. That's probably the one event that really makes sense to me, since Harry is still very involved in Invictus. That event makes sense. But he also visited the Australian War Memorial to meet with Indigenous veterans and laid a wreath. And Meghan is a guest judge on MasterChef, so she filmed that, which we will be talking about later. But the common theme here of these events so far is that if it's not for profit, then it darn well better be delivering them positive publicity. And because Harry and Meghan have failed at every turn and developed such a controversial image, and they're not anywhere near wealthy enough to run and maintain a foundation that could resemble that of the royal family, which is exactly what they thought they could accomplish up until last year, now with a massively downsized Archewell Philanthropies under fiscal sponsorship, meaning they are not in complete control any longer, they have had to shift their focus to just awareness visits. That's what this itinerary is actually showing us. That although their presence is very much an ego trip for them and an opportunity to gain positive publicity, besides the money-making venture, of course, it's not just them gracing the plebs with their invaluable attendance for an hour or two. No. They think that they can have what's known as a halo effect on these organizations. That the media attention brings awareness that can result in positive outcomes for these charities or organizations like the museum or the homeless shelter or the hospital. But the reality doesn't really match that. And we actually have a video diving a little deeper into this dichotomy coming up soon, so be sure you subscribe so you don't miss it because it's really quite interesting. In short, the why behind these sort of empty stops to these organizations. They're not bringing any tangible monetary value to any of these events. It's exclusively a little bit of time and media coverage for them. So the question is, who's benefiting more here? Clearly, the Sussexes. And they're missing the fact that a lot of the media coverage is almost always negative. But Meghan and Harry are not delivering anywhere near. It's nothing like what the royal family does when they visit places with long-standing patronages and stewardship of causes. And regardless of a really pretty significant turnout at the Children's Hospital and a consensus from media and pictures that however small the groups they're interacting with may be, everybody's smiling and having a positive experience, the real point here is that they have structured their trip this way. They've front-loaded their money-making activities with these handful of events, and they're working really hard to sell them as charitable efforts, when in reality, there's not much charity happening. Instead, they're using these organizations to boost their image, soften the media coverage, and it's in stark contrast to the second half of the trip, which is exclusively for-profit activities. Perhaps most importantly, though, this really shows us how badly things have gone behind the scenes. This marks the first time that they have done a hybrid publicized vacation. Nigeria and Colombia in 2024, while very self-indulgent, had no whiff of commercial endeavors or personal profits whatsoever. Granted, at least one of them was allegedly funded by someone else, which could have had all sorts of private agendas, but largely this is the first time we're seeing them try to juggle both these things on the same trip. And this says a lot about what's really going on behind the scenes. And I'm going to be discussing that in my next video. So before you go, be sure to subscribe and let me know your opinion. Does this fit the Sussexes reality better? With no ties to any institution, as private Humes, then it's not that weird, in theory, that they're visiting some organizations alongside commercial ventures, even though it's self-serving to structure it in the way that they did. The weirdest part then becomes that it's being publicized the way that it is. It's the media exposure that's actually more bizarre through that context. Why does anyone care? Why is anyone paying attention to what they're doing as two private people, checking in on a couple of charities and making money, doing some work? Why does anybody care? Why is anyone reporting on it? Why is it being publicized? I mean, I know Meghan and Harry are bringing their own journalist and photographer, which is weird in and of itself, but as private people, shouldn't the media be treating it as such? Or do you think that their continued use of titles and heralds history with the royal family means that they should maintain that integrity of separation between commercial and non-commercial events, and that mixing them is the wrong choice because they tried to come off as royal and have a history as such, and therefore the media and the public may always, to some extent, view them through that perspective? I'm really curious to hear which way you lean on this. Leave it in the comments now, and I will be back very soon with another video for you. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I'll see you next time. Bye!